Magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. Magandang umaga sa ating mga resource persons. Magandang umaga kay Pastor Apollo Kibuloy at sa lahat ng mga naririto. At sa mga kapwa kong mambabatas, kahit po yung nandun sa online at sa ating mga panauhin. Tayo po ay naririto sa harap ng committee ito sa isang maulang araw. At nais ko lang linawin po ang layunin para sa aking perspective as an officer of the court, as a lawyer, kung ano po ang layunin at kahalagahan ng pagdinig na ito. Ang Senado ay, unang-una, ang Senado ay hindi isang hukuman. At hindi po tayo naririto upang magpasya kung ang isang tao ay nagkasala o walang sala. Sa ilalim ng saligang batas ng Pilipinas, lalong-lalo na sa Article 6, Section 21, binigyan tayo ng kapangyarihan. Tinutukoy ko po ang mga mambabatas na magsagawa ng mga investigasyon in aid of legislation o bilang tulong sa paggawa ng mga batas. Sa hukuman, ang pangunahing layunin ay ang paglutas ng mga kaso at pag-alam kung may pananagutan o wala ang mga akusado, batay sa ebidensyang ipinapakita. Sa Senado, ang ating layunin ay iba. Ito ay upang mag-imbestiga at mangalap ng mga impormasyon at dokumento para sa isang makatarungan at makabuluhang pagbalangkas ng mga batas. Sa isang husgado, meron pong tinatawag na right cross-examine witnesses. Maliwanag po sa Rules of Court, ang Bill of Rights, at iba pa. Ngunit nais ko pong ipabatid na ang karapatang mag-cross-examine ng mga testigo, isang mahalagang bahagi ng mga pagdinig ng korte, ay hindi saklaw ng investigasyong ito. Ang proseso ng cross-examination at iba pang pamamaraan na ginagamit ng korte ay eksklusibo sa hudikatura. But we recognize, this committee, again as an officer of the court, recognizes the primacy of the judiciary insofar as this issue is concerned. One, because the committee requested the Regional Trial Court of Pasig to allow the detainees to attend today's hearing. It is an acknowledgement of the court's jurisdiction over the accused. Number two, the committee, before it moved and conducted a hearing today, showed respect to the court by acknowledging the court's jurisdiction and not conducting a hearing without the prior court approval. And number two, and I would want to make a motion here before I continue my opening statement, Madam Chair, this committee should likewise be furnished a copy of any opposition filed to form part of the records of these proceedings of the counsel of those accused present here. I request, Madam Chair, that we be provided copies of any opposition filed by the group of Pastor Kibuloy and all other accused in the Pasig case, if that would merit the consideration of this committee, Madam Chair.
So ruled, Majority Leader.
Thank you, Madam
Officer,
Chair.
please.
That would form part of the records of this case, Madam Chair. And again, I reiterate what I've been saying here. Ang atin pong ginagawa ay hindi po para maghusga ng innocence or guilt ng mga akusado sa isang kaso. Subalit, nais po rin nating bigyan diin na napakaraming desisyon ng Korte Suprema, simula pa lang nung Arnold versus Nazareno, 1950, na binigyan diin ng Korte Suprema ang kapangyarihan ng Senado na mag-imbita at magpatawag ng mga saksi, resource persons, para linawin ang paggawa ng batas. At kaya po tayo merong pagdinig ngayon. Subalit, nais ko pong hilingin sa lahat na during these proceedings, we show utmost respect and consideration to all persons here present, whether accuser or accused. Ang Senado po should remain as a bastion of dignity. Hindi po tayo narito para magtapon ng kung ano-anong uh, to me sa bawat isa, kung hindi para ipakita na ang paggawa ng batas ay ating pinapahalagahan at pinapahalagahan din natin ang karapatan ng mga naririto. Sa hukuman, meron silang, ulitin ko, meron silang karapatan na magsalita ang abogado. Dito po ay hindi. Let me ask the committee and all my colleagues here, whether present physically or virtually, to assure all of those listening that under our rules, all resource persons will be treated with respect and afforded fair treatment. And that this institution, as I've said, will always pride itself in upholding the principles of fairness and transparency. However, if there are legal matters against you, it must be addressed in the proper judicial forum, not here. In summary, while we have the authority to compel testimony in aid of legislation, any allegations or charges will have to be resolved in the court of law. And I'm now referring to the Regional Trial Court of Pasig. Madam Chair, let us always be reminded that we have a constitution. We have a living constitution, and that the constitution should stand as our unwavering shield, protecting the rights of all, whether accused or accuser, in ensuring that justice is served without discrimination and with fairness and equality. Sana po sa pagdinig na ito, makagawa tayo ng nararapat na pagbabago sa batas, and I'm referring to the Human Trafficking Act, the elements of which we cannot change because we're bound, Secretary Manalo is here, by the Palermo Convention. Perhaps the penalties could be increased, but just the same, this hearing is required of us as part of the complexities of governance that would require us to listen to various voices, even those embroiled in legal challenges and scrutiny. Again, Madam Chair, it is crucial that we uphold the integrity of our legislative process by respecting all resource persons present and upholding due process and fairness. Our commitment must be to engage in a meaningful dialogue while adhering to the principles of justice and respect for individual rights. Our role is to seek the truth. To seek the truth. Mapagandan ho natin yung batas, marami nakikinig ngayon, and not to pass judgment. Madam Chair, thank you for giving me the privilege to have an opening statement, and again, let that serve as a continuing manifestation as to the role of this committee in the coming minutes and in the coming hours as we proceed. I now yield the floor. Maraming salamat po at magandang umaga sa inyo lahat.
Maraming salamat din po, Majority Leader. At dagdag dun sa areas of legislation na tinukoy ng Majority Leader, inuulit ko lang yung bahagi ng opening statement ko rin kanina tungkol sa ating mga batas kaugnay ng pag-misuse ng usapin ng religious freedom, yung mga rape laws natin, kung nasasaklaw na nito yung mga usapin ng consent, sexual agency at religious freedom, at yung mga labor laws din natin, kung saklaw yung mga karapatan at kagalingan ng mga tinatawag na religious volunteers. So muli, salamat po sa Majority Leader. And at this point, lastly, bago natin pakinggan yung ating mga victim survivors, may request po sa ating good Foreign Affairs Secretary Manalo dahil kinakailangan nilang umalis ng mas maaga na makapagbigay ng ilang mga salita sa atin. Secretary Manalo, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you. Maraming salamat, Honorable Chairperson Senator Risa Ontiveros, Honorable Senator Francis Tolentino, my colleagues in government, good morning. I just want to thank Senator Ontiveros in this committee for giving the Department of Foreign Affairs the opportunity to contribute to our meeting today in aid of legislation. Nais ko lang briefing lang on 2 points. with your permission. The first point is on the possible extradition issue. And as you know, the Philippines has an extradition treaty with the United States of America. I wish to report that as of this date, the Department of Foreign Affairs has not received a formal extradition request from the United States. Doon po sa isang issue din, I want to focus on the request for assistance by any Filipino nationals in the United States who may have been victims of human trafficking in relation to this case. As of this date, none of our foreign service posts in the United States have reported receiving any request for assistance. Madam Chair, the DFA is ready to assist in providing any information that we may receive from this date relevant to the to today's legislative inquiry. And I'm also being joined today by Undersecretary Jose Domingo, who can add any input if needed for this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretary Manalo. Yes, would you, Sec Domingo, like to briefly add anything to these two updates on the formal request for extradition and the request for assistance?
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair, Senator Tolentino. Yes, as Secretary Manalo has mentioned, that we have not yet received a formal request, but we are standing by. Also, we have also not received any request with regard to trafficking, with assistance with respect to the human trafficking. But all our Foreign Service posts and all our offices in the Department of Foreign Affairs stand ready. And we have been in informal consultation and communications with our sister agencies in government. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you also, Yusek Domingo. The Majority Leader would like
Just
to
one
interject.
quick follow-up question, address either the Secretary Manalo or Yusek Domingo. I have here in my possession in front of me our extradition treaty signed November 13, 1994, which I believe should be read alongside Presidential Decree 1069. This has some legal complexities involved, and perhaps you might want to educate this committee, which would have primacy just in case an extradition request is sent to the DFA. What would happen to the pending cases lodged before the Regional Trial Court of Pasig pursuant to PD 1069?
Thank you very much,
Secretary
Senator.
Manalo.
Yeah. If I could first give a very general answer, and then, of course, on any specifics that might arise in the event that we receive a formal extradition request. Just to say, if we do receive a formal request, we will, the DFA will, of course, study it and see if it is consistent with the agreed procedure pertaining to extradition. And here is where PD 1069 would also come in. So we would have to study that. And then after, if we are satisfied with the request, we will, of course, refer it to the Department of Justice for relevant action. So in other words, we will still have to study any extradition request if received. Perhaps later, it's quite a detailed approach, pero yun ang general approach if we do receive such a request. Thank you.
One quick follow-up, just to remind the officials of Department of Foreign Affairs as well as councils present here. Anything that would transpire and would come out of these proceedings would, under oath, would be recorded. And pursuant to existing extradition rules, any request to have any transcripts coming out of these proceedings would have to be coursed through the DFA. Kayo po ang magpapadala nito mula sa committee ito papunta kung saan man. So you should be aware of that, and the lawyers here present should be aware of that, because this would trigger some concerns involving involving civil rights or individual rights. So just be aware of that. And I suggest, Madam Chair, that the DFA should stay here till the conclusion of the investigation proceedings, to be physically present. But that's what I'm saying. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Majority Leader. Assured naman po tayo na bagamat mayat-maya kailangang mauna ng umalis si Secretary Manalo, that Yusek Domingo will stay on with us. So the department will be well represented. Salamat po, Secretary Manalo, Undersecretary Domingo at Majority Leader. So ngayon po, ang una po nating witness ngayong umaga ay si Teresita Valdehuesa, ang di umanong miyembro ng unang batch ng pastoral ni Apollo Kibuloy. Bago po siya magsimula, I would like everyone to listen to this video, to watch this video. Si Ms. Teresita, si Ms. Ging, ang pinapatungkulan dito, but it will also give a sense of the threats that victim survivors face from within the kingdom. Open source po itong video na ito. In fact, galing sa public channel ni Pastor dati. So, ipe-play na po natin ngayon para mapanood nating lahat.
She contacted someone named Teresita Valdehuesa, who was a former worker here in the kingdom, who committed lapses of fornication with many ministers and men. That is why she was supposed to be disciplined, but she went out. This Alina Ostapchenko is saying things against me, and we were able to record every bit of what she said. Listen to her voice. Everything that you have said to Teresita Valdehuesa, who was a former worker here, who also backslid because of some lapses in immorality, will give you a sample of her voice that was recorded. Go.
I'm fine, dear. I remember you, Bayo. And I'm so glad that I'm already out of the kingdom. And it's a miracle that how I exit from there. Because the time, kasi I was so fanatic before. But when, time passed, I realized many things I can also share with you if you like. He asked me if I'm ready to dedicate my life. I said yes, because for me, I was thinking dedicate to God, so I never think about other stuff. And suddenly, he was on me already, and he was trying to pull my pants already off. And then things started to happen, and I understand that, oh my goodness, it's like I have to switch off my mind. I will not question, I will not ask if it's Father's will in my mind. That time, I will just not try not to feel anything like that. And because I was shocked by what's happening in the room.
You have to prove that in court, because this is an international ministry, and I have an international reputation. You will be sued by the kingdom in all places that you've called. We will not let this pass. Teresita Valdehuesa will be part of this. So better get your lawyers and defend yourself. We have lawyers all over the world. Wherever there is a kingdom, we have a general counsel in the name of Attorney Michael Green. In America, we have 18 lawyers who are observing all the happenings in the kingdom. We have financial consultants. We have lawyers who will defend the kingdom wherever it is being attacked.
For the record po, yung pastoral na binanggit dito, si Ms. Alina, she gave her consent also to the playing of this video in this hearing. So, Ms. Teresita, meron po kayong testimonyang hinanda. Pwede nyo na pong basahin. You have the floor.
Good morning po, Madam Chair, Honorable Senator Riza Hontiveros, and to Honorable Senator Francisco Tolentino, and to all the members of this august body. I come here today to share the truth that has been silenced for 3 decades because of great fear. And this is also on behalf of the many victims who have suffered in silence just like I have. I believe my testimony reflects their pain, struggles, and resilience. While I understand that this is aimed to aid in legislation, I am also grateful to be given this opportunity to inform those who still believe that Apollo Quiboloy has been innocent of the crimes he is accused of because he has never been. At the age of 17, I became a member of the church led by this man, Apollo Quiboloy, in 1980. I was a freshman student. I was eager and active in the community, even spending a significant portion of my college years living at the parsonage where he resided. In 1988, I made a difficult decision of my life to dedicate this to his ministry, driven by the belief that true fulfillment and salvation lay in serving God fully. This choice meant leaving behind my family, my career, and the person I once was. Despite the resistance of family and friends, I pursued my conviction. I joined a pioneering group that struggled to meet basic needs, but my desire to serve God fueled my persistence. Over time, I gained his trust and became a respected worker within the ministry. As the ministry grew, so did our blessings. We experienced answered prayers and expanding membership, which deepened our commitment to serving God. Apollo C. Quiboloy, whom I revered, was considered as God anointed, and his words held absolute authority. I respected him deeply, viewing him as truly the man of God. From the moment I dedicated my life to the ministry until 1993, I experienced a profound spiritual awakenings. I felt forgiven. My love for God deepened. And I was proud to serve alongside a man I believed to be holy. But one day while in Manila, I received a long-distance call from him. He informed me that he had received a divine revelation intended for me and instructed me to travel to Cebu, where he would share this important message. He was also scheduled to preach in Cebu that Sunday. Upon arriving in Cebu City, we arranged for him to stay at the Park Place Hotel in Fuente Osmeña. That evening, he instructed me to remain in the hotel, while Nilda Linda, the assigned worker, returned to the worker's house. When we were alone, I asked if I could just sleep on the sofa as it was a suite room. Instead, he insisted that I would sleep beside him and even said in Bisaya, compatible gyud taging kay parehas man og color ang atong suot. Translated, we are compatible because our outfits are of the same colors. I was wearing red pajamas with white dots, while he was dressed in a red t-shirt and white pants coincidentally. His words made me feel uneasy and quite nervous, and I saw a different personality in him. But I was quick to dismiss that unusual feeling. And because I had previously witnessed Ingrid Canada or ICC, Teresita Dandan, TTD, and Velina Salinas slept in his room alternately, it led me to believe that it was just normal and harmless. Moreover, we had been conditioned to suppress any negative thoughts about him. We were warned that any suspicion on him would reflect our own personality, using the words found in 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 15, I quote, "To the pure, all things are pure. But to those who are corrupted and do not believe, nothing is pure. In fact, both their minds and consciences are corrupted," unquote. And in those days, absolute obedience was a must. We needed to have an unquestioned loyalty and reverence toward him. Sleeping beside a man I believed to be chosen by God was for me then a great privilege, an opportunity for a sinner like me. But what followed shattered my sense of faith and trust. Without a word, after turning off the light, he embraced me, undressed me, and violated me with his lustful act, and left me in shock and speechless. He then said, "This is the fulfillment of God's revelation. He explained that God had revealed to him that I was to partake in God's life through him by surrendering my body, soul, and spirit. He also mentioned that other girls would go through him in a similar manner. His words were strange, but I was too shocked to respond. The following day after that Sunday worship service, Apollo C. Kibuloy left for Manila, while I was left to carry on with my duties, including organizing carolers for our annual fundraising. Confusion consumed me. I felt betrayed by my faith, by him, and even perhaps by myself. I began questioning whether what had happened was indeed God's will or simply a gross abuse of power. When I returned to Manila, I was once again instructed to sleep in his room. Fear gripped me, but defying the anointing of God was unthinkable. We had been taught that such disobedience would invite a curse. The next morning, he asked if I understood God's revelation. I remained silent, unable to process what had happened. He then referenced me to Philippians chapter 2, verses 6 to 12, explaining that just as Jesus humbled himself and obeyed God, even to the point of death, so he too must obey God's will by partaking in carnal things. He claimed this was necessary for him to understand the human experience and to fully empathize with others. He even told me that he had also been reluctant to accept God's revelation, but as God's chosen one, he had no choice but to act on it. I was more confused with his explanation, but I could not complain. I wanted to go out from the ministry, but I lacked courage. I did not know where to ask help. I had cut all the bridges behind my life, and I could hardly go back because it would mean starting all over again. My family was poor, and I had no connections. My option was to stay because I was still bothered with what if it was indeed God's will? December of the same year was an escape for me. Caroling as one of our sources of funds, and which had been participated in by every member of the ministry all over the country, became my excuse of staying away from the worker's house in Manila where he stayed. In January 1994, I was in his room with Ingrid Canada, the international coordinator of the church, Tessie Dandan, the national administrator for the church in the Philippines, and Felina Salinas, his personal assistant. During that,
Miss Teresita, before you continue po, yung nabanggit nyo ng 2 beses, Ingrid Canada, nandito po ba siya sa harapan ninyo?
yes, patabi po siya ni Mr. Kibuloy.
Sila po, yung nagtaas ng kamay. All right, salamat po. Please proceed, Miss Teresita.
During that meeting, he informed the girls that I would be included in the inner circle. Right there and then, I realized that these women had likely endured similar experiences. Without any words, we shared a mutual understanding. None of us dared speak about what had happened to us. In February 1994, I was sent to Hong Kong, still carrying all the confusions and emotional turmoil. Despite this, I continued to pretend that everything was fine. When one of our musicians, JC Pangilinan, was scheduled to return to the Philippines, I seized the opportunity to send a personal letter to ACQ. In that letter, I poured out my feelings, openly expressing my emotional distress. I was honest about how deeply shocked I was to learn of his life beyond the pulpit. The man I had revered as a holy figure was in reality an ordinary mortal, one who had exploited my genuine commitment and dedication to God. My faith wavered, and everything I had once believed was shattered. I prepared myself for a harsh response, expecting a violent reaction from him. To my surprise, there was none. Instead, I was sent back here. Upon my return, I was even more surprised to learn that I had been promoted. I was appointed National Crusade Coordinator, National Logistics Coordinator, and Luzon area administrator all at once. This was a sudden and significant promotion from my previous role. By God's grace, I excelled in all my assigned tasks. Despite this, fear gripped me every time Apollo Kibuloy would come to Manila. My only relief was when one of the girls would accompany him, giving me an excuse not to sleep with him. I kept myself busy, visiting satellite churches to distract my confusion and agony. One day, ICC confronted me saying, ACQ sensed my distance. I made my work an excuse. February 15, 1998, ACQ used me again. It was always out of fear that I obeyed, a fear mixed with anxiety that he might knew how I pretended to be extremely grateful that he allowed me to be a part of his physical life, because in all honesty, and God truly knew I was not. All the pent-up emotions suffocated me that on the following day, while preparing for church, I collapsed. ACQ performed mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, but later I learned, he told others, that it was just a way for me to seduce him, labeling me as Jezebel the temptress. I believe Apollo Carrion Kibuloy understood that I never wanted the life he was trying to impose on me. My decision to dedicate my life to God's service was driven by a sincere desire for spiritual purification from the sins I had committed before becoming a full-time worker. I had only one goal: to live a holy life and ultimately to attain heaven. As the Bible says in Colossians chapter 3, verse 5, I quote, "Put to death, therefore, whatever belongs to your earthly nature, sexual immorality, impurity, lust." But how could I achieve this with the circumstances that I was in? Disobedience and complaints were never an option. Anyone who did so was labeled as carnal, as someone who did not overcome the flesh. Everything was always twisted. One day, ICC said, "Sir has noticed that you've been distant." I made up excuses, trying to avoid the truth. I had been telling Tracy Dan that I was extremely exhausted. She presumed that I was just too focused on my responsibilities, especially in the logistics department. I was always pressured to meet my 15 million quota. Every December on caroling season, if ever the sense that there was really something wrong with my belief, I was instructed to prepare my documents for my USA visa, and I believe realization came later when I already left from his group that it was also to distance me from the workers and members here, that I might be able to tell his dark secret. I never wanted to go to America because inside of me were unresolved spiritual issues, confused mind that bothered me always. But my visa was approved. I then knew that I was to lead and plan for the fundraising to be done in America, and we would employ the same strategy of our money-making here in the country. In America, I witnessed the double standard life. What we prohibited in the Philippines, we did them there. We lived in luxury. We toured around. We dined in fine and expensive restaurants. We watched movies. Sky's the limit when they went shopping. I decided to stay in the apartment where the minister and his family lived. Despite the insistence of ICC to stay with them, I refused. I made a lot of excuses. Sapagkat, hindi ko po natin na kaming nasa Amerika ay masyadong nagpakasasa sa paggasta sa pera, na masyadong pinaghirapan ng mga kapatiran at ng mga full-time workers. Bilang namuno po sa crusades, evangelism at logistics departments, saksi po ako kung paano nagsakripisyo ang bawat isa para lang makapagbigay sa iba't ibang pangangailangan sa simbahan. Nakita ko na kahit pambili ng bigas ng membro, kailangan sakripisyo pa para lang maibigay sa simbahan, kahit gugutumin pa ang mga pamilya. Nasaksihan ko po na kahit last centavo para pamasahe, kailangang ibigay pa rin bahala nang maglakad papuntang simbahan ang mga mahihirap na membro. Hindi kinaya ng aking konsensya ang double standard life. Maraming workers ang napalo dahil sa panunood na ng sine, pero kami sa Amerika, halos linggo-linggo nanood ng sine, bawal sa amin ito dati. Naghirap ang maraming workers at members sa pagkaruling at pagsulisit sa bawat tao sa lahat ng dako dito sa ating bansa. May namatay, may na-aksidente, may nakulong, may mga na-rape pa na hindi na na-report. Dahil baka hindi paniwalaan at baka makapag-fasting pa dahil may kasalanan na itinago, kaya napahintulutang nangyari. Lahat may kota, di ba? Napakasakit po sa damdamin ko dahil ako po ang namuno sa mga fundraisings. After December season, ang mga members kailangang magtinda ng mga kakanin para may bigay sa mga pledges for Alay kay Kristo, building funds, love offerings, television pledges, tithes, and others. And when they could not provide for their own foods, they would just resort to fasting. Meron din pa akong quota, 10 to 15 million pesos to raise in the month of December alone. I organized the carolers nationwide to meet my quota. We recruited and trafficked our young people from Mindanao and Visayas to carol in the provinces of Luzon and in the national capital region cities. Marami pong estudyante na Nobyembre pa lang kailangan nang mag-absent sa paralan at ang iba hindi na nakabalik sa pag-aaral dahil inuna ang simbahan, inuna ang pagkaroling, inuna ang paghanap ng pera. But nobody questioned where our income was spent. Sa mga buwan ng Pebrero hanggang Oktubre, ang ibang workers na nasa logistics department kailangan mag-solicit na naman throughout the country using the permits of the different associations, Pag-asa ng Buhay, Children's Way Foundation, Tulong sa May Kapansanan, Handog ng Pagmamahal, Pagdamay sa Dukha, Shivers for Christ. The supposed income na dapat ibigay sa mga beneficiaries sa mga nasabing associations, hindi naman talaga truthfully and honestly na ibigay. Only a little portion of the income was shared to the beneficiaries. Ang ibang workers naman, walang hinto sa pagtinda rin ng mga kakanin na may quota of 500 to 1,000 pesos a day, Monday to Saturday. Ito ang buhay ng mga workers na nasa logistics department. In America, they began to notice my indifference. ICC called my attention, stating there were reports from my assistant in the logistics department in Manila that I had secretly sent money to my family. Then, she informed me that ministers wrote letters to ACQ and reported that I tempted and fornicated with them during my visits to their satellite churches. I was so shocked to learn of the sudden accusations. I also wrote a letter and enumerated the real circumstances of my life with all the ministers I came in contact with in relation to our aggressive fundraising, being the National Logistics Coordinator. However, that was not enough. I was then forced to write a long letter of confession, making it appear that I was a sinner who committed all kinds of sins, including those I had committed before joining the ministry. I complied, believing that through this written confession, I would be totally forgiven from my old sins and burdens and be completely sanctified. In detail, I wrote everything I thought was considered sin I had committed from childhood until the present. I also implicated ACQ in my sins. It had the same tenor of the letter I wrote in Hong Kong in 1994. And this time, he was furious. Then ICC instructed me to revise my letter. I was told not to implicate ACQ and to state that I was the sole sinner and I was filthy. Upon realizing how angry ACQ was, I revised my letter out of fear and stated that I had sinned because I truly was filthy. In detail, I imagined sins.
Ms. Teresita, yung paulit-ulit yung binabanggit na ICC, sino po yun?
Ingrid Chavez Canada po.
Sila pa rin po. All right. Please proceed.
In detail, I imagined scenes and I made it appear that I had committed them all. That was how stupid I was to obey and exaggerate my story. Just to appease the anger of our leader, Apollo C. Kibuloy, not knowing it would become my death sentence later. My exaggerated story was then distributed to all his leaders and ministers, and they believed I was filthy, I was pervert, and I was wicked, painting me as the sole guilty party, while ACQ remained innocent. Little did I know this confession would lead to my condemnation within the ministry.
And Ms. Teresita, pag sinasabi nyo ACQ, sino po yun?
Apollo Carrion Kibuloy po,
All right.
October 15, 1998. I was sent back here to receive a punishment through prayer and fasting in the guise of spiritual discipline. And the fasting they planned for me was beyond my imagination. It took me 7 months to suffer hunger and isolation in the mountain of Tamayong in Kalinan, Davao City. They placed me in a small, dark, elevated room beside a kitchen, separated only by a mat and walls. My bed was rough, made of uneven slabs, with exposed nails pressing into my back as I slept. I woke up this morning in pain, with no beddings, and the cold October nights left me shivering. I requested a blanket and a mat, but I was denied. Every day from 8 to 5 p.m., I followed a strict routine, regardless of the weather, enduring hunger and isolation. No one allowed near me, as I was labeled filthy and deserving of this punishment. Members were forbidden to speak to me. I was physically very weak and so depressed. I prayed that God would just take my life. Ilang beses po ako nanalangin na sana kunin na ng Panginoon. I started to question God and wondered if this was truly a divine process or simply human punishment. I asked myself, is this ACQ's way of retaliating because I rejected the life he imposed on me? It felt like vengeance and disguised as spiritual discipline. My only solace came from reading the Word of God from Genesis to Revelation over and over again. Every day was a struggle of faith. I struggled to believe that the process was still the perfect will of God for me. I struggled to believe that I really was a sinner and that I was recuperating from my spiritual disease for the lack of faith. That was to justify my present pains and to at least lighten my burden of loneliness. On January 8, 1999, I gave ACQ a resignation letter and I requested for a fare so that I can travel back to my home in my province. He did not approve my resignation letter. I pleaded to Ingrid, and like a child, I cried for help. But she remained untouched, telling me that it was a divine process. After that conversation, misery doubled. I had no money, and I was still physically weak, so there was no way for me to go out from the compound of the prayer mountain. Waiting for the restoration was the only alternative at the moment. If not for the comforting words of God, surely I would be totally gone out of my mind. They continually accused me of sins they alone knew and imagined that would always lead me into fasting. It eventually hardened my heart because I started to realize that the purpose of doing it was to totally break me down and to even slowly kill me. I no longer saw the reason to stay. I submitted my resignation as a full-time volunteer worker for the second time. But Apollo Carrion Kibuloy refused it again. A week later, on September 30, 1999, I decided to leave without asking for permission, determined to free myself from his control. It was only when I left out of the group that I finally clearly understood that the man I had believed to be God's chosen and holy was an impostor, oppressor, and deceiver. He manipulated me using his authority and power as God's anointed. I thank God that he took me out from his bondage, from that ambiguous feeling of fear mingled with so much love and loyalty to my Redeemer, Jesus Christ. But he was not finished with me and did not stop terrorizing me. Alex Camia, his personal bodyguard, a full-time worker, once known to be a champion in gun shooting before he joined the group of ACQ, together with his team, kept coming to my place to harass me, serving a fake warrant of arrest to a minister who stayed in my house. This minister settled in my place after he was gunned down in Davao City but survived. The team of Alice Camia was apprehended, and when investigated, they had several firearms in the car, several plate numbers, and there was also a red plate. The registered owner of the car was Apollo C. Kibuloy. Because of their failure to serve the warrant of arrest, they blamed me for hiding the minister and filed cases against me of obstructing justice and grave misconduct and an act on becoming a public official. After that incident, I heard that Alex Camia was the suspect of the murder of an ex-worker who was shot down inside his home, and this ex-worker did not survive. I was scared to death when I heard this news. My option was to remain silent because killing could have actually happened when Camia and his group came to my place. There was also an ex-worker, Elsa Bolivar, who was a senior citizen, a woman shot dead while she was in her garden in Tagum City. I was so hysterical when pictures of her bullet-ridden body were sent to me because she had just visited me in my place before it happened. Fear consumed me and I remained silent. 3 years ago, nagkausap po kami ni Alex Camia. Humingi po siya ng kapatawaran at nagsabi na siya ay nautusan lang po na kailangan din akong iligpit. Pinaniwala po siya na ako ay may malaking kasalanan at ako ay napakasamang babae. Nang tinanong ko kung ano ang aking kasalanan, sinabihan daw siya na tinukso ko raw si Apollo Carrion Kibuloy. Nakiapi daw ako sa mga ministro. Narinig naman po ninyo yung sa video. Nakipagtalik daw ako mismo doon sa workers' house at nagnakaw daw ako ng 3 million pesos. He even said in Bisaya, di ba nagtugot man ang Ginoo pagpatay sa dautan? Doesn't God permit the killing of the wicked? Doon ko lang naintindihan na kailangang i-declare ni Apollo Kibuloy sa lahat ng mga workers at members na ako'y makasalanan at napakasamang babae para magiging makatwiran ang lahat ng parusa na binigay sa akin at magiging makatwiran din kung bakit ako kailangang patayin. Apollo Kibuloy called me Jezebel, the temptress, using his pulpit to broadcast how filthy and evil I was. This became a pattern. Kung may mga workers na may alam sa kaniyang buhay, sa sikretong buhay at aalis sa kanyang kingdom, sila ay akusahan na napakaraming kasalanan. He would always exaggerate their weaknesses at ipaniwala sa mga workers at members na sila ay umalis dahil may mga marumi at mga napakasamang mga tao. His followers only heard his side of the story, which was always filled with lies and twisted truths. They had their side, our side, excuse me, was never heard and was never allowed to be heard. They only believed whatever he fed them and even defended him and attacked those who defied their leader without investigating the truthfulness of the circumstances. Nakita naman po siguro natin kung paano siniraan ng mga workers at defenders ni Apollo Kibuloy ang mga testigo dito. Mga napakasamang descriptions para lang ipahiya ang mga nagsalita ng kanilang mga karanasan sa loob ng kanilang kingdom. Mga salitang hindi nababagay sa mga tinatawag na mga citizen ng Kingdom of Jesus Christ. Their intention is only to demoralize and warn others of the consequences of defiance. Last August 2021, during one of his television programs, he once again maligned me, broadcasting nationally and internationally that I was a fornicator and an immoral woman, which we have just watched. Madam Chair, I would like to remind Mr. Kibuloy to remember the biblical stories about the lives of King Nebuchadnezzar, King Sennacherib, and King Herod. All of them fell into the hands of the Lord. Nebuchadnezzar, you know that, was separated from his people and lived like a beast and ate grass for 7 years. King Sennacherib died a tragic death, murdered by his own sons. King Herod was struck by the angel of God, died, and his body was eaten by worms. Their sin was that they replaced God with themselves, considering themselves as gods and blaspheming the one true God. This is all, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Salamat po, Ms. Teresita, sa testimonya mo. Kahit kailangan mong iyakan para basahin sa amin. Bago yung isa munang follow-up question ko sa inyo, gusto kong i-acknowledge yung presensya online ni Senator Cynthia Villar. Salamat, Senator Cynthia, sa pagdalo nyo. At ang Minority Leader, Senator Coco Pimentel. Salamat kaayo sa pagdalo. Kung walang opening statement si Senator Coco at si Senator Cynthia, bago yung interjection ni Majority Leader sa Department of Justice, isang mabilis na follow-up question sa ngayon, Ms. Teresita o Ms. Ging, Ate Ging, just for the record, guilty ba kayo dun sa mga krimen na inakusa sa inyo, yung pagnakaw ng 3 million pesos, yung pag-fornicate sa iba pang mga ministro? Guilty ba kayo sa mga iyon?
Of course not.
All right, salamat kaayo. Majority Leader, for your interjection with the
Thank you, Madam
DOJ.
Chair. Nothing to do with the previous testimony. Magpapaalam po kasi ako kasi magsasalita po ako sa Liga ng mga Barangay and the Minority Leader is already here to fill up some legal questions likewise. But Madam Chair, before I leave, gusto ko lang tanungin ang, hindi ko kasi nakita kanina, dito pala ang Department of Justice relative to my previous questions answered by the DFA. This is speculative, academic, and purely legal. If, wherever, if an extradition request is lodged before the DFA, there is under the PD, which I cited before, a process which would necessitate the Department of Justice to file a petition. But that is another court. And that is another court which would constitute as the extradition court here in the Philippines. And if there is going to be an extradition hearing, the purpose is not to determine the guilt or innocence of the accused, but whether they would fall under the ambit of our extradition treaty. Is that correct? Who will answer? Attorney Torribillas or Attorney Quintana? Speculative lang ito. Ano lang to?
Senior State Counsel Quintana, I believe, Majority Leader.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, sir. Good morning, Madam Chair. Good morning, Your Honor. As to the as to what will happen on, should the Department of Foreign Affairs later on receive a request for the extradition of Mr. Quiboloy and the present criminal cases are filed against him, the Philippines, as a requested state under the Philippines-U.S. extradition treaty, has the option to postpone the filing of the extradition case, in which case,
Postpone.
only the filing, Your Honor.
Uh-huh. But
Uh,
is the extradition court would be constituted here in the Philippines.
yes, Your Honor.
Not necessarily the court where the hearing is being
Yes,
conducted.
it would be a separate separate proceeding, and as I mentioned, it might be postponed, or we can accept the request and file the case in a separate extradition
It
case.
will not be a criminal court.
No, Your Honor. As you correctly pointed out earlier, the extradition court is not there to determine the guilt or innocence of the subject of the request.
Thank you, attorney. But my second question is related to the first question and to the previous questions. The extradition shall not be granted under Article 4 when the person sought has been tried, convicted, or acquitted. Tama po ba yun? So pag may pending case na rito at mabilis yung proseso, conviction or acquittal, hindi na siya pwedeng i-extradite. Is that correct?
Your Honor, under Article 4, that may be a ground for refusal of the request for extradition, but that in that case, so Your Honor, ang ano po dun parang in effect parang double jeopardy. But in this instance po, there is no double jeopardy kasi po yung
Saying double jeopardy. One of the grounds for refusal would be when there has been a trial, conviction, or acquittal that's explicitly stated under Article 4 prior prosecution. Double jeopardy will not apply because of the concept of dual sovereignty. Am I correct?
yes, Your Honor.
So, ang tanong ko, mas makakabuti ba na mas mabilis ang trial sa Pasig, which would result in either conviction or acquittal, dahil hindi na pwedeng ma-extradite?
Sir, it's independent of the request for extradition. So regardless if the criminal cases are terminated, are expedited, it will not affect the extradition request.
Siguro, aralin niyo mabuti itong Section 1 ng Article 4. Parang very explicit naman ito. You still have time. Number 3 question, I learned that correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm sure you're following this through news accounts, that the Department of Justice of the United States dismissed the charges against a certain Miss Dueñas. Tama po ba yun?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, and this was just a few weeks ago.
Last week, Your Honor.
Last week.
October 7th.
So, ang tanong ko rito, and this will probably be a lingering question, what would be the effect of the dismissal of the U.S. cases against, is Dueñas a miss or a male? Ano ba yan?
He.
Female? She? Female.
Female.
What would be the effect of the dismissal of the U.S. cases against Ms. Dueñas to the pending cases of Pastor Quiboloy in the Philippines, since some of the elements would be the same?
Your Honor, if I may defer to Prosecutor Torrevillas.
Torrevillas.
Deputy State Prosecutor Torrevillas, please.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Good morning, Senator Tolentino. It will not affect the cases pending against Pastor Quiboloy, considering that Ms. Dueñas is not one of the accused in those cases.
One of the accused in cases pending before the Regional Trial Court here in Pasig or in the United States Department of Justice? Saan po? Saan jurisdiction?
Before the Regional Trial Court of Pasig and Quezon City, Mr. Senator.
So it won't affect.
Yes.
But there is an interrelationship between the elements involved in the U.S. cases and the Philippine cases. Tama po ba yan? And probably I'm not
I-
jumping the gun on what the defense counsels were doing. So walang effect. As I've said, this is just speculative.
It will not affect the cases pending before the Regional Trial Court of Quezon City and the Regional Trial Court of Pasig because Ms. Dueñas is not one of the accused, neither she one of the witnesses for the prosecution.
But some of the defendants in the case pending before the U.S. Department of Justice are likewise defendants, are accused here in the Philippines. And I understand there would be a second hearing come May 20 before the U.S. Department of Justice. Tama po ba yun?
I am not aware of that.
Okay. So paano naman kung yun ang magkaroon ng ibang desisyon while pending dito sa Pasig and Quezon City yung ibang kaso? Any speculative answer? O kung wala, mahirap na
It
siguro.
has no connection at all
connection
because,
at all.
opo.
Different jurisdictions, different elements. Again, Madam Chair, maraming salamat po sa pagbibigay sa akin ng pagkakataong makapagsalita. I reiterate again my earlier statements that respect and dignity should permeate the entire proceedings today. And I hope that the dignity of the Senate through this committee will be enshrined, Madam Chair. Maraming salamat po sa pagkakataong ito at maraming salamat sa mga resource persons natin na dumalo. Magandang umaga po sa inyo lahat. Daghang salamat.